The tech research side of things, which is a lot of fun early in the game, but it starts getting kind of tedious at this point. Mainly because I guess the worst case here is for the US, which is adding 28 research points. You add to that the Brits, who have a fair amount too. Another 11, 39, plus some diplomacy points that have been converted into them. That's just a lot of points to allocate and then to track and cope with. Plus then there's these obnoxious factors like submarines and ASWs and specialized units like Marines and such not produce one strength point, one factor of the counter. But then, for whatever reason, strategic bombers produce BRP's worth, which means if you get one success, if you buy one strategic bomber production result, you end up with a strategic bomber and a couple of points floating over. I don't mind with the normal military production that those are done in BRPs. Air production, well, having to remember that strategic bombers, which isn't too hard because it has its own line, are bought separately from interceptors and from, you know, it's just this, why is it made so, I don't know, why were the lines drawn where they were? They're not consistent, they're not, anyway. Someone did bring up the argument, and you know, I convinced myself of it as well, that the attrition is to be done by what amounts to supply zones. It's the only way that it makes sense, and the way it's worded is worded the way it is because they're not actually supply zones. This is not a supply zone because it's not in supply, so it's mirroring the supply zone factor. I'm gonna try playing correctly. The flip side of that is, you know, I got some better rolls over here maybe than I would have, but I also was unable to attribute the results as effectively as I could have. And that's why these things have existed for so long. They should be under attrition attack and should have just been destroyed already. For good or bad, shortening the front is not particularly good, I think, for either side, really, but it's hard to tell, and I don't think it's going to have much effect on the game either way, really. There were some cases where I wouldn't have maybe gotten hex gains here in Egypt, but I don't know how much those really helped me. As we can see, I'm sending the Axis armor back up to try to plug gaps in Tunisia because we're getting smashed through here. I really don't know if this side of North Africa can hold out at all for the Axis. I'm going to try my best because this should be able to break through, assuming that this holds out. If it doesn't hold out, well, then the US forces are going to be coming up here, and I think Egypt stands. So we've got kind of an interesting race going on there. There shouldn't be any exciting weather here in the spring, and I guess we're about ready to start the 44 spring turn. I went dancing on Thursday night, so yesterday nothing really happened. I was doing what I could to, you know, get ready for work in the morning rather than anything else. Normally, when I do that on a Thursday night, I'm fine. I take a nap on Thursday. I missed the bus home, so I didn't get home until 4 in the morning, walking a couple hours, and I was in no shape to play all day, and just very, very physically fatigued. I couldn't stand here playing. I basically had to sit down all day. With the U.S. stymieing the Japanese to the South Pacific, or actually putting up some sort of resistance, this is sort of our last chance to take Johnston Island as far as I can figure it. U.S. production is going to start really cranking in. If I can take Johnston Island, I would have liked to have done it earlier, but I don't think I was as clever as I should have been about it, to tell you the truth. Well, it's hard to tell. Among other things, I should have built an artificial port, which I could have put at midway, and then I could station my forces out there more easily. As it stands, though, I'm going to make one more chance at it, and if I succeed in taking it this time, I'm going to be clever enough to fortify it, to make it harder for the Americans to get in there. I thought that my interception capabilities would be enough to protect it. That hasn't been the case, and the U.S. was able to grab it back pretty easily. Fortifying it's going to make it at least more expensive to take, and we'll see how that works out. The naval battle, the U.S. is going to contest, and they've got their magic strategic advantage, so they'll get some bonuses in the tactical side too. We'll see whether or not the larger Japanese fleet is going to be able to defeat the American fleet yet again. U.S. airstrikes were essentially ineffective. They found a couple Japanese groups. They went after them. They got their planes kind of mauled and weren't able to do anything. The Japanese found actually what was the U.S. weak spot, which is, and they did not find the carriers, which they would have liked to have hit, but they found the weak spot, which was the surface ships. They took out the remainder of the U.S. battleships in the Pacific, and this is terrible. This is what's really holding the U.S. back, is they can't stand and fight, because very soon they're going to start getting hit with battleships up against their carrier groups, and they're just not seeing anything that they can do anymore without battleships to provide a line of defense against them. This is something I kind of like. It was always present, you know, in the old Empire of the Rising Sun, where the carriers really had to be protected because the firepower capabilities of the regular fleet units would catch up to you. So you had to have kind of a mixed force, and the Japanese have a nice mixed force. The US have lost enough battleships that, and you know, I've devoted entirely my resources to building carriers, which means I really kind of have to start pulling some of the battleships out of the European map in order to have any chance of affecting things over here in the Pacific. Anyway, I really like the way the naval combat's working out here, even if I'm not, you know, doing a good job with it as the Western Allies. They have to pull out of here, and now they're in danger because Johnston Island is going to fall. I think they got a lot of defense there. They didn't build a fort. It's harder for the Americans to fortify, but still, they've got like 9 factors of defense there, a 3-point unit, plus the air unit, which has to be counter-aired. The Americans chose to counter the Japanese search plane. I forgot to actually give the Japanese the extra die roll, or the Americans the extra die roll, I think. Oh no, I counted that in, yeah. Which means it's going to be a tough fight. I'm going to have to use the forces here to support the invasion, which I counted on. I don't have a lot of Japanese strength that I can bring in. I can only bring in like 5 strength points because I don't have many destroyers for the Japanese. That's their weak point here. So if I'm only bringing in 5 points of attack factors, that means I can send, because of my naval capabilities, another 15 points of land naval support. So that gets me up to 20 to 9. That's 2 to 1. That's probably enough. And then I don't know how much air I've got left. 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 18. Divided by 3 is 6 more factors of air. So what was I at? I was at 20, 26. That's going to be a point short of getting me to 3 to 1. There's really nothing I can do. I can't like transfer an air unit over that far to help with it. So I don't see a way of getting beyond that 2 to 1 table, and you know that could end up very bad. I could end up losing boats or planes trying to support the invasion. Another factor of this is because I need my task forces here, I can't pursue for a hex, really. I mean, maybe I could, right? Because I've got a lot of surface ships. But what if I pursue without my carriers and I get hit with carriers? So then the question becomes, okay, well, let's say I devote some of my carriers. Do I want a partial force trying to chase the U.S. force? It just seems too risky. So I'm gonna go with just trying to support the invasion fully and let the U.S. fleet escape, for whatever that's worth. I think I forgot to mention anything about what's going on in the European map. I've already played that out. U.S. conquered Tunisia. We had some isolated units attacking here. Up here, they knocked out some U.S. units in Oslo. They knocked out the armor here. We're pulling back to Algiers. We started evacuating units. Now that we're in supply, we can do that in supply from here. We've always had supply to this location. And finished off some partisans here. If we're paying for the attacks, we might as well kill off units also in the Mediterranean front. We'll go up and try to kill these guys off too. And what else? Well, I guess the biggest thing is moving down here. Now the Russians are almost in the war. The German turn to attack would have been this turn. This is their last surprise option. They chose not to take it. We weren't really set up. We're hoping to kind of win North Africa. I don't think that's going to happen. So then it becomes, well, do we want to extend the front into Turkey? We kind of have to, but the question is, to what extent that means. The Russians are going to start deploying forces down there. They would have been very vulnerable had the Germans set up to attack. Of course, had I been paying attention to it, the Germans would have set up to attack, the Russians would have set up to defend, right? But yeah, it's a pretty broad front that's going to be coming underway. And the real question there is, of course, where the Russians want to devote their offensive capabilities, right at Germany, or start picking up things like Turkey. The victory conditions for the game are when Germany surrenders. It's not like WIF, where it's like, well, at least under the days of decision 3-player situation, it kind of mattered what Russia gets at the end of the war, so they want to make sure that they go into all the minors that they can afford to go into, must devote themselves to before they actually force Germany to fall. And the same with the Western Allies. They want to win, in the West. They don't want to just make a landing in, say, Italy or something and try to march their way north. They really do want to dictate what what the world is gonna be like post-war. I like that. This, though, has wow, you really have to knock out Germany and or Japan pretty quickly to get any kind of victory at all, especially because of the way Gathering Storm condensed the time limit. I'm in 44 already, and we've got nothing going on. I don't know how much I'm going to be dictated to by the victory conditions, though. Kind of ignored some of the rules, so why not ignore the victory conditions, too? One thing, these isolated units just disappear when I'm playing with the different attrition zones, the way that I'm convinced that they're working. It does put them in the isolated units box. They won't be rebuilt right away. Hey, it's not going to cause China to surrender, though. They're just not in that bad a shape. You really have to wipe out their units. And I have no idea how I'm going to do that without taking, at least a limited offensive, but even a limited offensive isn't going to do it. Attrition is probably the best way to wipe out their units, point value-wise, but they can catch up. They can survive that. And for whatever reason, if I end up taking this, I end up helping the nationalists. So that, trying to make an offensive against the communists doesn't seem valuable. It's possible that offensives against the partisans would probably be our best bet. Over here, the Indians are taking the brunt of the attrition losses. I don't want to spend a lot of money, taking offensives in Southeast Asia, particularly, because I need that money to build up my forces and to continue the war over here against the U.S. So I can't really devote too much over there. And I don't think it would be terribly effective. I look at the values I have. Yeah, I could move some planes around, and those would be helpful. And I may want to do that provide some air cover over here in case the British get uppity or something. But for the most part, this is just the naval warfare of the Hawaiian Islands right now. Over on the strategic warfare box, we're really hosing the U.S. forces. They've gotten their naval DRM up to ours, and their ASW is higher than our torpedoes. They had the magic advantage and everything, but I've got no ASWs over there. I do have some that I'm going to be building, and those will help, mainly because I don't need to worry about what's going on in Europe, except for one thing. The Germans are starting to build advanced subs. Now, there's nothing I can do about these. They just do damage, and they're pretty awesome because of that, and, well, I'm not going to bother with the regular U-boats as long as there's a huge ASW presence out here. But if I can start, you know, chewing up their transports with the advanced subs, that'll work well. I still have to do the builds. You know, I think I'm under a sort of SAD, the seasonal affective disorder or whatever. The weather's beautiful here. It's nothing to do with that. It's just got to do with the amount of daylight time or whatever. Somehow that affects me. Always has. Really sucked during college because I would be gung-ho for the first, 2 months. And then get to this late October or whatever, and I'm like, I just give up on everything. That involved leaving the house. I'm really glad my work now doesn't involve me leaving the house because I'm able to cope with my depression as long as I don't have to make it out into the world regularly. And then, in college, the second semester was always this, I had none of that gung-ho feeling early on. And then towards the end of the semester, I'm like, wow, I've screwed everything so far. So I'd usually do okay in the fall semester and horribly in the spring semester because I just couldn't cope at all. And I don't know. Work is easier because it's sort of this, I don't know, very, very, even leaving the house, it was a very clear pattern. Whereas school, you have a lot of leeway and freedom there. So kind of an interesting situation developing out here in the Pacific. But let me briefly hit what the Allies did. Western Allies have cut their way through Tunisia. You see there's still some Italians here. These are American. But that whole line is pretty much collapsing, and it really doesn't look like this is going to be able to hold up. I've got to keep a supply source there, and to do so might mean having to fall back on Tobruk or whatever. Try to keep a pocket in supply and alive, or maybe a couple of pockets, so that these forces can rescue them. This guy's in a lot of trouble if the U.S. cut through, and I just don't think I have the kind of forces to hold the line. Now, if I wasn't able to hold it in Tunisia, I'm not going to be able to hold Libya. And so that's kind of the problem the Axis has over here. But here, what's going on, naval activities, the U.S. came back to invade again. Well, this time they got caught. The Japanese have enough forces here at Johnston Island that they got a big bonus in terms of dice, so they were able to catch the invading force. They had basically no chance of catching the patrolling force. Now the patrol has the choice, and I believe they will, to come in and fight. They're not fighting the entire Japanese force, but the rest of it, two task forces, are coming into play later in other rounds. They're one round away, basically. So this is not going to be a successful invasion. But we may get some advantage over the Japanese in that first round of fighting because we're certainly going to have our entire fleet in play. We have, three task forces here that we're intercepting. So we have +3 to the dice for that, or 3 dice to that. So we can make the distance away that we are. Now, the U.S. is clearly pulling out. They got hammered, actually, mainly because of some very lucky rolls by the Japanese. The U.S. airstrike, by the way, this thing can evade the surface units. The U.S. airstrikes hit this. They took down 1 battle cruiser. For the U.S., though, they lost 6 points of laden destroyers, and that's huge because destroyers are what they need. We were going to start building some more. And they lost a CVL, which probably should have only been damaged normally. I was attacking down here, I don't remember, on like the 1 table, I think. And I rolled a 12, and I rolled, or an 11, and I rolled a 12 against the destroyers to get 6 of them down. This was just a really horrible result. We were hoping our numeric superiority would maybe give us an advantage, would be able to... Well, what it ended up was, yeah, we have 2 carrier strike forces, but we could only conglomerate against 1 group. The Japanese split their strike forces, which was probably a mistake, except if they had known that they were going to roll such ridiculously good rolls. The problem is, of course, they went into this with something like 13 points of air units, which means because the airstrike, the air technology hasn't improved for either side, they're both limited to only 8 air units in a strike, and it means they would be holding a lot in reserve that they couldn't even be using in cap or whatever. Now, I could have devoted more of my cap over, and that wouldn't have been too bad, to strikes, and we would have done even more damage then. The U.S. is going to be able to get away scot-free. There's nothing the Japanese can do here. Well, I mean, other than what they've lost. And the Japanese are really wishing that they had built an artificial port, an additional port in their technologies, because they have no ports running anywhere back to Truk, basically. Truk, Guam, Japan. That's what they have, and Rabaul. That's what they have. And an additional port at this point, with what they just did, they might be able to take Honolulu, but... and at the very least, they would have a forward base that they could keep their fleet, some of their fleet at, for interception purposes, to make sure that the U.S. can't retake one of these islands. Next turn, we might see Honolulu fall, though, if the U.S. isn't able to move a lot of forces there, which they will. They can't fortify it, though. They need, for the same reason the Japanese can't build a port, the U.S. needs a research result. They need to have devoted points at the beginning of the year. Now, they could just allocate those points whenever they like, and you know, this is a spring turn, so they would have just allocated them for the fortification, and be able to lay that down right away. So I don't know. We may actually be seeing the possibility of an invasion there. One thing I've been noticing is how little the effect of oil has been. Basically, it's a bookkeeping task. But beyond that, if you didn't have the oil rules at all, you know, the Japanese aren't really required to go down into the Dutch East Indies, and that may not be where they would focus, but historically they really had to do it. Germany wouldn't be spending points on building these synthetic oil plants, and they've got Baghdad nearby too. They're probably going to be grabbing that to get the oil out of Mosul. So it does kind of drive some of your intentions. Germany would be in a lot of trouble if they hadn't devoted so much to synthetic oil. But it looks to me like they're going to have, well, Germany and Italy are going to have a fairly easy time. The real expensive thing is all these damn naval actions. But so far, I haven't really run over the limits. And part of the reason for that is boats are sinking, and I'm not having to pay as much. But yeah, I mean, the Japanese are pulling in 6 a turn out of these two, which is enough to give them an excess naval unflipping, as it were. So they're in pretty good shape still. If they lose this area, or if their transports get cut down, they'll be in a lot of trouble, though. And then we'll just start to see them just collapsing as an effective naval power. It looks like the U.S. have trimmed it down to that level. I had forgotten to do the strategic warfare. They've got them down to 11, which means next turn the Japanese should only be able to haul 4 oil. that's going to mean starting to dip into this, the reserves that I have. And it's really kind of the beginning of the end. And one of the things might be to not take a construction effect from the oil. If I'm only transporting 4, I lose 1 automatically, and I may not be able to recover my fleet without spending more oil. So we're at the point where it's actually getting ugly. Well, the problem is there's no easy translation. There's a damn chart in the rule book, and I don't want to find it. I just looked it up. But there's nothing else, and no player aid, I don't think, that covers how much oil you need. It's not even a chart. It's just a paragraph of numbers. How many transports you need to move X number of oil. And I think it's like 12 lets you move a 5th one, or 13 lets you move a 5th one, and 18 lets you move 6, or whatever. And there's some progression there. It's not fixed in my head, and it's not, it's not spelled out anywhere that I can find in terms of player aids. It would be useful to have it somewhere, but there's so many player aids already that you can understand the decision not to. But that's so much of the problem. It's not something simple like, oh, you need 3 transports to carry an oil or something like that. Nah, it's like 1 or 2 transports carries you 1 oil, 3 through some other number carries 2, whatever. And I mean, it may be some kind of sequence that I can recognize, but I haven't spent the time trying to figure that out. And so, I'm most likely to just say, screw it, I have oil, because I have lots of transports and I have oil. Well, it turns out those numbers don't work, right? You need near your maximum capacity to haul it, and I've probably been hauling, 6 oil when I couldn't actually. For turns, because I think it's like 18 gets you 6. I'm not sure. So because I do things on the camera and I like to bitch, let's take a look at what it is, because it might help it might help me actually learn it. So first of all, to add to my bitching, this is under like general naval rules, not the strategic warfare. It's really hard to judge where something belongs, but it's in a really kind of weird place. And you have to remember that to find it if you're not hunting it through a chain in the rules, because it's not where you'd expect. Okay, so let's see. 1 transport gets you 1 oil counter, 2 gets you 2. 3 to 9 get you 3. 10 to 12, get you 4. There's no progression here. 13 to 15 gets you 5. 16 to 18 gets you 6. And so on. What? So what are we looking at? 1 and 2. Is it a Fibonacci? No, because it gets little at the end. It really is hard to get through more than 3 oil counters. That's what the deal is. And it's like, what the hell? And what do you mean and so on? If you're going to throw random, progressions in here, I guess the and so on is once you hit here, the spans are 3 each. And so if you can remember that you get 3 at 10, and then every 3 transports gets you an additional oil, that would be useful. But I mean, good Lord, it's just such a random devising, and obviously it's done probably having tinkered with numbers that were, more reasonable to remember. They found that, it doesn't work right this way. So either you were getting cut off too much by the low end, or too little at the high end, if it was just like every 3 or something. I don't know. And it probably has to do not so much with the weight of oil being transported either, but with the game effects that the amount of oil that you can transport actually means, in terms of the oil effect cards that you generate from it, where maybe those effects were too much. So it's not like, you know, necessarily raw tonnage that you're shipping or anything like that. It's some abstracted thing that when you fit it together with all the other abstracted little bolted on pieces to this game, you have to create this kind of chart that, like, you know, isn't based on any particular numbers. It's just, hey, it's what worked, you know. It's doing some alchemy with the game system. And when game systems start being designed that way, the more you do that, the worse it's going to be, because the less it's going to be intuitive, the less it's going to be memorable. And also, people come at it and say, well, wait a minute, this doesn't even make sense anymore. It's historically inaccurate. I'm shipping way too much oil. And then you start saying, oh, I'm going to wave my hands around, and it's designed for effect or whatever, which means that, like, you know, it doesn't actually represent things. It's how Euros are designed, right? The US isn't the only one without enough capability to strike effectively in the Pacific. The Japanese also have a destroyer deficit. Could not come up with the number of points, even if we could clear the Navy out of Pearl. So there were two questions in mind. One is, can we airstrike Pearl Harbor? And it's pretty heavily defended at this point. There's a lot of naval air here, in addition to what's on board whatever carriers there are. So it's fairly likely that we wouldn't be able to launch an airstrike against a dual port like that, all the effects, etc., that would do us any good. And our naval air replacement rate is lower than the US's, so to some extent it's going to be very, very difficult unless we face the US out on in the open sea again, and take down some of their carrier support. And the thing is, while the US is handcuffed because they don't have enough battleships, the Japanese don't have the kind of overwhelming air power to be able to go in and take the fleet out of there. But they also don't have the number of destroyers to capture Pearl Harbor. And in fact, they don't have enough to really allow them to take, say, New Caledonia or Fiji over here, either of which would help them in the strategic warfare battle. So instead we took Port Moresby, which was lightly defended, and we lost quite a bit attacking it. And then continuations over here with the Attrition War. We don't want to lose a lot of units or anything because we're taking the construction effect. And that's one of the problems. We've got all these Chinese collaborators that we triggered using the occupation policies. And so we can get a lot more force pool together, because one of our other problems is we don't really have a lot of force pool of infantry to do a hell of a lot with, to pursue a big attack here or anything, or even in China. I don't know how much we really need that, but we're getting to the point where we're kind of stretched thinly. It was hard to find units to even make the invasion on Moresby, even other than using up expensive Marines, even given that you know, we don't have the destroyer force. So we've got a lot of things we got to buy. We got to buy transports. We got to buy this. We got to buy that. Same kind of situation that the U.S. is in. And, you know, really a lot of it comes down to that strategic element of the war, being able to keep your engine running. And that's one of the things that you really have to like about this game. Unfortunately, I'm really bad at it, because I haven't been playing it, you know, often enough to have a really good feel for what that balancing is. And a lot of the balancing ends up being on the bookkeeping side as well, trying to maintain a certain, you know, numerical level as to, yeah, I gotta keep my transports up, but, you know, I gotta pay for them too, and that's all gotta be balanced. And you gotta be able to do that all in your head, really, keeping that spreadsheet or whatever very much in your head all at once, to try to figure out, well, can I afford to make the attack here? Can I do this? Can I do that? Because you have very limited resources in a lot of ways in this game. And when I was playing the old one, the Advanced Third Reich and Empire of the Rising Sun, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I feel like this time I'm blundering a little bit more than I should, you know, and I'm not getting as interesting. I'm not feeling like I can do as much as I feel like I should be able to. I feel like I'm getting handcuffed too much. And really that probably hurts the Allies more than the Axis, because the Axis, especially the Japanese over here in the Pacific, had a fairly uncontested beginning to the game. And now it's really hard for the U.S. to put down the coup de grace on the Japanese, especially given that we're also, there's the timer here was slowed down by gathering storm. The fact that we can't really do anything in Europe until the Russians come in. And when the Russians come in, it's just going to be this huge hammer blow that probably shatters the Germans. So I'm not even sure it was all that necessary to be fighting here in North Africa. But the Axis has to put a certain amount of their force to defend against that. And they've got quite a bit of their force down there. And when the Russians hit, that's a lot less that they have to face. It also means the Germans couldn't come to the decision that a first strike against the Russians made sense. But here, this is nothing funky happened over in the Pacific except for my blunders. And those have kind of led us to a position where the U.S. is handcuffed and the Japanese are handcuffed, and I'm here in 44 and I don't see a path forward for a long time, because it takes so long to build these big battleships, or even moderate-sized battleships to recover the fleet. So until Germany surrenders, or until I can kind of neuter the Axis fleets, I can't really devote the Allied fleets over to the Pacific in the numbers that I want, or numbers that mean anything. This task force here is barely important. Sitting over here, a few battle cruisers, a few cruisers. It's not even able to do an invasion, but it is able to kind of open up a threat, I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure of what. I can give some naval support to attacks against Thailand or something. I have no idea. Maybe I can help defend Australia if I move it over there. But as it stands right now, the Allies are pretty much locked in to not being able to do anything. And it's not like the Japanese have this capability to come sweeping against the Allies. They don't have that kind of superiority, but they have enough that the defensive perimeter is getting built and it's holding, and the U.S. is just not able to crack it yet. They will eventually. I mean, the game just assumes an Allied victory. There's really no path to an Axis victory, even in Europe, that I can see. Maybe Sea Lion, maybe if you can crush the Russians because they're played completely incompetently or something like that. Those were always the two paths that you could get to win the old Third Reich. Maybe those still work, but there's no, hey, I can drive into India and, pretty much destroy the Allied presence in Southeast Asia that way and cut the Brits down so hard. You can't do that in this game. It's because the way the map is set up, you're not allowed to actually make that transfer through Persia or whatever, like you can in WIF, and like we were seeing in my game of WIF. But we'll keep playing. I think this is going to be an Axis victory, as they always are, just a matter of, hey, we outlasted all the victory conditions. But we'll see. The Russians might just come barreling in and crush the German force completely. It doesn't look like it. I mean, there's a decent German line here, and I got a lot of BRPs. I can start throwing infantry down real soon. To kind of highlight the situation of some of those hard economic strategic decisions, the limitation on the Japanese right now is actually their naval construction rate, their shipbuilding. I could have built more shipbuilding capacity, held off on some of that to keep the U.S. out of the war. Part of my decision in terms of maybe what is, preventing the U.S. from being quite as effective here was their buildup was kind of slow. The Japanese really didn't do a lot in China. They didn't do the shipbuilding. They wanted to keep the U.S. out for as long as they could, and I think they managed a pretty good job of that. But now I don't have the chance to land the hammer blow that I want to, and equally importantly, I can't keep up my transport rebuilding and stuff like that. Now, One of the other factors towards shipbuilding, and why I haven't been investing in it heavily in terms of my research, I don't know what the so I haven't been putting any points into their shipbuilding throughout the game. I got one in at some point, probably from a mobilization, but one of the reasons I haven't been doing that is that they don't have a lot of BRPs to spend, and ships are expensive, right? And any activity that uses shipbuilding points uses up a lot of BRPs, 3 per factor or whatever. So those were points that I was using for other things, and I still am for fortification, etc. But now I'm in kind of an interesting position because I'm really being taxed on the shipbuilding side. Now, if I had more shipbuilding, I might have paid off this oil, the construction effect, so that I could get more ships out there, so that I could get more oil next turn or whatever. Right now I'm down a couple of oil a turn, and one of them is getting paid for by this. The other one looks like it's just this timer ticking down on me, and I'm in trouble if I can't do something to change the balance of the strategic war. And unfortunately, without the shipbuilding, I can't change the balance of the strategic. I mean, it's this real vicious cycle. I've got all these carriers sitting around waiting to be built, and they're taking up some of my shipyard capacity. For what that matters, that's not too big a deal, but it's preventing me from building the destroyers that I need. It's preventing this, that, and the other, and these are decisions that it's not easy to walk back, right? These guys sitting out there, I've invested a lot in them, and it turns out with my naval air raid, etc., I couldn't fill up any more carriers, so I don't think I actually built any. I think I spent all my naval air building on, refilling the carriers that I've got on the board. But I spent my naval capacity building up my ASWs and my transport capacity, because that's more important than trying to hunt down the U.S. Shipping capacity, which really doesn't do much of anything, to tell you the truth. If I could really squash it, I could prevent oil from getting to Pearl Harbor, but as it stands, it doesn't take a lot of oil in Pearl Harbor to keep that fleet alive. So, again, there's this balance you have to try to find, and I don't feel like I found it, but I don't feel like I found it for either side, to tell you the truth. The U.S. doesn't have enough shipbuilding, and they committed it to the wrong places early on. Way too much on the carriers. I expected that the battleships weren't that effective, well, it's not good to have a fleet without them, it turns out. Okay, so over in Europe, we'll get to the Pacific in a moment. The U.S. managed to break through, but they failed on the attack here. They figured they'd leave this alone. It's going to be isolated. It'll have a hard time making its way out. They could have smashed it, not with an overrun. They didn't have the air power within range. And they knocked this out. They did a massive air assault on the French fleet up here, which may have to withdraw. It's in too much danger where it is. It's one of the real problems, say, the same kind of situation Malta's in, where land-based air can just, pulverize what's there eventually. It's just, there's a certain defensive value to Malta that's not present over here in Cagliari, or Cagliari. And the Germans finally got smart here. They pulled their planes back into the Ruhr region, which means the Allies can't just knock out their defensive planes. And between that and the interceptors that they have, they were able to suffer almost no losses. They've been really idiotic in terms of putting all their planes up in the front. They only have to really defend the German factories. You don't have to worry about, say, Paris getting bombed, which I think is weird. I thought that was different in the original. Now over here, the Allies are at it again, and they thought they'd slip in, but as you can see, the odds aren't that great on them. We got two Japanese fleets hitting the invasion, 2 more 1 turn behind, then some quite far back. So we'll see how it works out, but it looks like the U.S. is going to have to pull back again away from Johnston Island. But I failed, actually. I forgot to take into account the U.S. played a strategic magic card. And I don't know what the dice were, but I know one of the fleets was right on the 1 level, and the other was on the 3 level. So let me roll for the one that might have made it. All right. Yeah, the Japanese are not going to be able to intercept here, so that invasion is going to go on, and I'll move the Japanese back to where they came from. Oops. Surprisingly, I caught myself cheating again. Partisans. Can't build them until the Russians are in the war. Oh well, you know, and I built more this turn. I'm not going to go back and erase them. It's just a matter of, you know, yeah, it's been a headache for the Axis. But, you know, when you start thinking about it, who the hell cares, right? I mean, one, it's a headache, but it's a headache they're going to have to face eventually. It's points that the Allies are spending. It's costing the Axis more, but it really doesn't have that huge an effect on the overall scheme of things. So, like most things in this game, I'm not going to reverse my decision. The Allies are getting a bigger fleet together at Gibraltar. We're planning on actually trying to force the showdown in the Med. I don't know how well it's going to work and whether or not they're freeing up the German fleet to come out and fight. They don't have a hell of a lot pissing around Britain. Germany isn't really going to be able to do an invasion anymore, though. So that's one of the big factors. Is we know Russia's coming in, and that's enough. And you can see the Russians building up here along the Turkish border. And the U.S. actually doesn't have enough light ships to screen all its carriers, so it can't really put a task force into play. I'm hoping to get more forces there. I was sailing something around the South Atlantic, but I think I chose not to. I've got some additional forces kicking around down here. I thought I had a destroyer down here that doesn't seem to have made it. It's getting built later. Canadian ship. Oh, no. It did make it over. It was built on Canadian West Coast and made it here, I guess. Whatever. Anyway, you know, the U.S. is getting a navy built up. It's not a very potent navy. It doesn't have battleships. It has a lot of light ships. We're hoping that's enough to bring to bear our carriers and cause enough casualties to the Japanese, who are losing the strategic warfare side of things very badly at this point. Again, I think now we're down to only being able to haul 3 oil this next turn. So, you know, it's either chew up the oil, start taking some worse and worse effects, or I don't know what, or start winning the war somehow, you know, the strategic warfare war, which doesn't look like it's going to happen. The U.S. is also losing shipping, but it's not that big a deal to them. As I'm starting the research side of things here in fall of 44, the Germans start getting jets at this point, just from the Tyrolls. And I guess I chose to pick up a jet interceptor. I think I did that right, but I'm not sure. I think they can buy either interceptors or regular jets. Add them to the force pool. I figured the interceptors will be more valuable. Not for any particular reason, except I don't have to worry about basing them. You know, wherever I'm getting struck from, east, west, it doesn't make a difference. The jets will be able to play in on it well. And so, okay, that's great. But then I thought to myself, wait a minute, what the hell? There's flak units in this game. Maybe as I was pawing through, I saw these suckers, and I had kind of forgotten about them. This is one of the problems with the specialized rules for everything. There are no specialized rules for flak. They are just added to your force pool like regular, you know, infantry, armor, whatever, but you don't start with any, and they just kind of slipped my mind completely. And I think the Germans want to start developing their military to add some flak in order to, you know, provide some defense to the particularly exposed areas. They're very cheap. They're only 1 point each. So they could be very, very effective compared to the expenditures on the interceptors. The problem is they kind of, I think, only work in the hex that they're in. I'm not sure about their application, and I've got like 2 hexes to cover. They'll still end up cheaper than buying interceptors, and I can add them in addition to more planes to my force pool. And with the Japanese bouncing back for Johnston Island, set a patrol out. Does the U.S. want to intervene? That's the question. The U.S. fleet is kind of weird because they're so carrier heavy that every task force is made up of a carrier component, a fairly large carrier component, which means that if I put anything in the line, it's pretty much automatically going to get engaged by the regular fleet elements. But how much longer can I wait? That's the real issue. Can I just give up Johnston Island, or and try to defend Pearl, which has some additional air components on it, and as long as I can't get bombed out of there, I can hold on to it. The Japanese may not be able to afford bombing. They may not be able to afford going back to sea too many times. I don't know how many ships they have. 3, 7, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 23, 24, 25, 29, 41, 49, 55, 65, 68, 74, 80. So they're running right around 100, which means that they're going to use an extra oil if, no matter what for this. They're already losing 1 oil this turn because they're only bringing 3 in. They're taking that stupid thing again. But if they're going to be back another one, they're going to run out pretty quickly if they can't start doing something about the strategic warfare situation. But, and no, they don't get to build synthetic oil in this game. In WIF, they're allowed to. But the big thing is, can the U.S. afford to just let the Japanese steam out there and take Johnston Island? I don't have much to defend it with. That's the problem. My picks, I have a strategic, so maybe I could get an automatic success, but maybe I can't. I'm going to leave this to a die roll. Odds we go out there, and even we don't. And by the way, the Japanese have a strategic to cancel it, but we don't know that. In we go. This is not going to work out well for the U.S., I'm pretty sure. It's tough. After 1 round, the U.S. is at the tactical disadvantage. The Japanese have this marker. Trade-off, we lost a carrier versus one of their old battleships. Next round, another surface fleet is coming into play. Our carrier group gets stuck and hit in battle. I don't think we can afford to fight here. We were kind of thinking that would get caught and would get some room to withdraw a little further away. That didn't happen, so now it's exposed. The real problem here, of course, is this fleet ends up hitting that, and we don't know what the Japanese have there at all because we didn't face it. We know it's probably their heavy battleships. And it's more than we can handle in that case, I think. The real problem is that the air attacks aren't really coming through too heavily. What happened was, why is this here? Oh, well, I guess it wasn't found. I guess what kind of happened was each side only found one of their fleets, and that meant that there wasn't a lot of the air power didn't play as big a role as the U.S. maybe hoped. I think they have to get out of here, and that really does mean Johnston Island's going to fall. The only question was, can they kind of win the attrition war outside of just, continually intercepting and forcing the Japanese. Well, the Japanese are going to have to send their whole navy out if they want to conduct this operation anyway, so that's not really an issue. But the attrition war, in terms of the losses, the Japanese cannot replace this very easily. But then again, the U.S. can't replace its shipping, but it's got tons of carriers coming forward. So losing carriers isn't as bad as it may seem, in like a whiff type game or something. But the carriers really don't feel like you need as big a surface fleet in that, or I don't know. It does serve a covering purpose, so I'm just not sure. But yeah, I don't think I should have engaged. And given that I lost, if I had won the strategic card, then I'd have the tactical advantage, which would have been canceled out by this. But with the Japanese holding the tactical advantage, they have the search advantage. They're likely to hit a decent number of my locations, and they can kind of take their choice of them, or they can get multiple hits and therefore choose one. I rolled too many dice for the U.S. because I forgot the counter error, so canceling out that 6 that I forgot about is fine. I had 2 1s and a 6, so we'll just say they didn't hit that because I forgot it. But yeah, this does not look like a good situation for the U.S. to continue fighting from. I don't know how many planes I have. 4, 8, 17. I mean, I have enough for 2 strikes. 2 strikes could do a decent amount of damage to the Japanese. The thought here is I could, if I can do enough damage to the Japanese, I can recover it much more quickly than they can. They don't have a lot of shipbuilding, whereas I have a huge amount. I just haven't been getting the ships that I need. I don't have those capital ships lined up. Then again, neither do the Japanese, so smacking their capital ships puts things on kind of a parity where their carriers facing my carriers, well, I'll win that fight just on the naval air recovery rate, if nothing else. Whereas if I let them just have Johnston Island without losing too much, what am I really losing? They can rebuild the fort here. That's the thing. And make it really tough for me to take, where I have to expend, a lot of invasion strength. But on the other hand, it's not that hard for me to get here. There's a good chance that I do get here without getting intercepted. Jeez. I don't know. And the Japanese can't afford the oil to keep fighting for it. That's for sure. Yeah, I think we withdraw. Try to drain their oil. Since I'm at war and I'm not really dealing with the tensions at all, except for adding the Russian one every now and then, I forgot completely. The U.S. has had 3 mobilizations. I skewed them all in a row. Troops here, bunch more shipping capacity here. That would have come in helpful, but whatever. So they're going to be able to come back a lot stronger in the Pacific than they have been. It felt like they were really kind of handcuffed, and I think some of that shipping capacity would have come in handy. I don't know how much. It's 1 additional shipping capacity per turn for the mobilizations, but now I'm all the way up. I can build 12 new ships in the Pacific each turn. That's pretty potent. I don't have my shipping that high in the Atlantic, but I can always use research to bump that up too. It's just I completely forgotten. I've got another turn coming this time up here. I also have some additional money that I have to allocate to the U.S. all at once, I guess. Yeah, that doesn't matter at all because they've got tons of money and they're not going to run out of it.
Been away for a couple of days on kind of a work-related, not a trip, but activities outside the house that really have been wearing me out, and I haven't had the energy to play. But coming back to the Allied turn, I noticed something interesting.
if I shift this air base down here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's close enough that I can strategic bomb Berlin, which doesn't have all the protections. First of all, there are no tactical air here, but also it's not fortified, la la la. Interesting. The problem is the range of the strategic bombers is greater than the range of the interceptors, which means I'd be flying against the German interceptors. And this is why interceptors are awesome as opposed to trying to, position your air power for defensive purposes. I'd be within range of the interceptors. I might be able to get more hits in total, but I'm going to be taking a big cost in terms of bombers coming in. Because these guys will be able to hit without any protection. So I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to continue the fight trying to knock out the ability of the Germans to recycle their bombers. But it's just kind of something that's in the back of my head. I noticed that I forgot to build all those flak units that I was planning on building with that production result. Instead, I threw some more infantry in, I think. I really should allow myself to exchange some of them because this is, definitely a tool that the Germans should have available to them, but I don't like rewinding things. But if I was playing kind of straight through or playing just one side or something, I almost certainly would have built those flak units. I chose to recycle that British air base over here just to give me the option to do that. And after my airstrikes, I may well do it because there's a lot of defensive air still available for the Germans here. I may be better off taking the hits on the bombers and being able to do more damage than just trading hits on air units. My interceptors are going to get chewed up coming through this anyway because I'm not able to drive away enough of the German Air Force. I'm just not doing sufficient damage to the Germans. Remember, I was hitting close to 20 points, getting into the firestorm range before. Well, that's when I could clear the German planes out of the way. That not being the case anymore, I've been hitting like, 2 or 3 bomber damage. That's not sufficient. I'm doing damage to the German BRP base by clearing away their air cover, but or not to their base, but to their BRP levels, by making them keep rebuilding the planes. But I think I can do better than that by actually hitting their BRPs themselves. We'll see. In terms of down here, we're seeing a massive move forward by the U.S. forces. The British fleet is setting out, and it's getting intercepted here outside Tripoli. It's prepared to give some invasion support, ground support from at sea in case of a breakthrough here. I'm counting on that breakthrough. I'm not sure it's going to happen because I wasn't able to clear away all the air power. If I had been able to recycle the British base, I could have gotten some more planes onto the front and maybe knocked out the Axis planes. I was counting on being able to hit most of them. I can also provide, we'll see whether we survive that invasion. I placed my sub out here with the intention that actually can counter-intercept and get into the hex too. I also did an air landing over here in Sardinia. I'm not sure if I've got the ordering correct here, but the point is I want to get more bases over here. I'm not sure how much value this is, but being able to start pushing more and more forward, it just seems like a valuable thing. Plus, if I get an air base here, I can start strategic bombing Rome instead. Oh, maybe that's an idea anyway. That's where I want to go from. I'm not going to have any interceptors here. again. Once I get to Caligari, I'd be able to have the interceptors in play, but I won't have the interceptors in play. Well, I'll have the Allied interceptors in play. No, they still only have a range of 4. I don't have enough air range. So if I get this, I'll be able to start focusing on the bombing the Italians instead. I'm not sure how much value that is, but they are the soft underbelly at this point. And it's possible that an invasion there would cause a collapse, just like an invasion through Vichy might be of value. Right now I've been focusing on the move towards Turkey, but I'm not so sure I'm going to be able to make that very easily with the amount of force that's in North Africa. And we'll just see how this kind of develops. If we take out the Italian Navy, so here was one of the things. I had to make a decision how much of the Allied Navy to commit to this. I committed the 4 task forces that I had. They actually couldn't all fit in Gibraltar, so some of them are over here in Casablanca or whatever, to keep them out of the Med where they might get hurt. But I committed the 4 task forces I had there, but I could have actually brought something like this down with a base change and launch. The problem with that, of course, is if I start sending too many task forces in, I'm not so sure the Italians are going to actually attack it. But I might open up things so that these can go into the Raiders box, so that these could actually skim out and get in there. That's the real restriction I have, is I need this big fleet to see if I can beat the Italians here, but I also need some fleets here to prevent the Germans. The Germans actually do have a fair little force built up after their big losses in Bergen. So, well, we'll see how it all works out. The big naval battle is not going well for the Italians. Lost a number of battleships. Basically, there's a couple of factors in play, and they both have to do with quality. The quality of the navies. The Italian naval DRM is only 1, whereas the Allies are at 3, and the French are also at 1. And then the air power, the Axis Italian air power is only 1, whereas the Allies are at 2. The air power is particularly important because that's the size of the airstrikes you can make. The Italians can only send 4 squadrons on an airstrike, which they're really having trouble here. I still have a sub-attack to make against them, but I think they're pulling out of here. These squadrons haven't been touched yet. That includes the Italian carrier force. But basically, I think I have to cede to the Allies that they have enough naval power to operate in the Mediterranean without me being able to interfere, except if it's really, really important and I'm willing to lose my navy over it, like an invasion of Italy might be that important. But this little bombardment raid on Tripoli to give the additional strength there on a potential overrun because my intention is actually to hit this hex. It definitely doesn't look like it's a worthwhile attack to make. So I think that's where we're gonna pull the Italians out of here. We've lost 3 Italian battleships and a French one to 1 British. Now some light ships were lost as well, and that kind of helped even it out a little bit. But it's very clear that the Italians are losing the attrition battle of this naval battle, so they just want to get out of here. And with that naval support and air support and just the overwhelming amount of force that the Allies were able to bring to bear, they brought their exploits through. I didn't launch the attack on this hex from back here. It would have just been a 1-to-1. I needed to clear the planes out of Burat with the exploitation, but I did end up attacking it during the exploit phase because I was able to bring my air power into play at that point. Anyway, as you can see, the German line is collapsing. I don't think the Axis is going to be able to hold Egypt, even with this tiny narrow border, very easily, just because of the amount of power that the Allies can pump through. But they can slow them down a great deal because there aren't a lot of air bases up here. I've got to cycle all those air bases up to get any kind of force on there. Plus, that narrow corridor means I can't bring a lot of the force, the ground force, to bear that I need to. In the long run, the Axis isn't going to be able to hold, but in the short run, it may mean that the Allies have to concentrate, you know, on trying to cross the Med, for example. Take back Malta or Sicily or whatever. As long as we can devote our Navy here, we're in pretty good shape. But the problem is, of course, over here on the Pacific, our Navy isn't sufficient. And it's really not overwhelming over here. We've got, you know, enough to cover the Germans in the North Atlantic, enough to dominate the Med, as long as we don't pull any out, right? So it's a close run thing in Europe, and it's a losing proposition in the Pacific right now until our production starts gearing up a little better. The fact that it's not geared up all that well is really my own fault. I could have done a better job with the shipbuilding there, but I probably could have done things better with the Axis powers as well. So I still haven't done the strategic bombing. I'm trying to decide, you know, I don't want to run the gauntlet of these. I guess that's the big thing. And so then the question is, do I want to let things, the interceptors take a shot at me? I'm not sure. Running the numbers, I've got like 8 interceptors, including a jet. That means I'm going to lose 3 bombers outright on average, and then a number are going to be prevented from making the attack. And then, of course, I have to face the air defense table, which isn't going to be as big a deal in Berlin, but it's still, that's an objective hex and a city, so that's still like on the 3 table. And it's going to probably knock out another plane and a couple more prevented. So we're looking at 4 destroyed and probably 5 or 6 not making it in. So I'm only going to make it in with like 3 bombers or something. That doesn't sound very promising. On the other hand, with my interceptors in the way, I do some damage to the planes that the Germans have. If I go in after Dusseldorf, but I haven't been happy with the results I've been getting there. So I'm thinking I may actually not want to do a strategic bombing this turn, for what that's worth. What about if I launch out of here? I still have to face those damn interceptors. That's the problem. Until I can get within range that my interceptors are in play, I don't want to even up. I don't want to go against his interceptors alone. So I think we're going to call off bombing for this turn. I don't think that it's doing me... Well, see, the problem here is the U.S. can afford the losses. Alright. I just hate facing, what is it, 12 more intercepting planes plus heavier gunfire. This is much, much worse than I wanted to deal with. Shit. And it's not like I can't rebuild everything that the Allies want to rebuild. They don't really have a point limitation at this point. I'm at like 500 US BRPs. The Brits are lower, but I can always ship them some money. So yeah, I think I've got to try to wear the Germans down. So we'll do that. Should have gone with my gut there. I wonder what that weird graphical image was. I don't know if you saw it, but it was like some kind of weird thing on the screen showed up. We did a 7-9 hit, which is probably worse than would have happened here. Well, certainly worse. So we took out 7 of the Allied planes outright and actually drove away all the bombers. There was no chance of the bombers coming in. And then the Allies did very little. I think they killed 1 German plane. So that was totally a not worthwhile exercise. Even if points are useless to me, I don't want that kind of trade-off no matter what. So I guess we're done with the European front, and I gotta get myself over here, figure out what I'm gonna do in the Pacific. Another unsuccessful attempt by the U.S., this time at Midway, hit by the Japanese fleet, but the Japanese fleet may be done at about this point. Militarily, they're fine. It's just that having to keep coming out and spend the oil resources, our shipping for Japan is down to 3. I don't know what that allows, like maybe 2 oil or something like that, 2 or 3 oil. We're just not going to be able to keep up. You know, we're having to spend an oil at the beginning and the end of each turn. One of them is the regular naval oil, but the other one is just to recover our fleet. And we're really getting to an ugly position with that. And in addition to that, we're losing 17 BRPs for not having the materials there. We're going to have to start taking oil effects. We just can't continue to spend, or we can't, yeah. I mean, at some point it's just going to run out and we're going to have nothing, you know. So it may just be that we allow the U.S. to make some gains, make some attacks, or maybe we challenge them with less than our full fleet. These guys are flipped. I got to pay them off because it's really getting ugly. In terms of counters lost over here, not a lot really. But Japan's having trouble because of the oil effects with rebuilding and keeping their army at full strength too. You can see I'm actually running out of 1-point units on the Chinese mainland. So it's an ugly situation. I've still got to do the economics for the Allies, and that's really about it. Keep the camera open though, in case something exciting happens there. We're beginning to get all the toys in play. The atomics will be coming in pretty soon. So much of the technology, you know, is changing just because of the way the game works, that it's making the game more and more complicated, where I have to make more lookups on my little cheat sheet card, which has been a lifesaver as long as I can keep it up to date. But Russians have added rockets. They actually added them last turn, but I didn't look up the rules because I wasn't ready. They're going to war this next turn. We actually ended up getting an extra turn in there just because, more than I anticipated, because I didn't do math well, basically, in my head. But these rockets have basically no target. There's nowhere they can hit except inside Germany, with one exception. They can hit the oil resources. Not quite sure how that works. They basically have to do an amount of damage and they knock it out of commission, I think. That's how it works if you bomb rockets. I did learn one thing that I screwed up. The Allies could shift their bomber force over to the Mediterranean and start hitting the Italians without anything having been in the way. The reason they can do that, the interceptors have to be and the bombers have to be assigned to a particular front. That's what these little boxes are for. So if I want to attack, you know, the Italian land, that's going to be a possibility. And then the Germans have to make their decision. Do they shift some or all of their interceptors over? What are they going to do about it? We'll leave things at a pass this time. The German interceptors can be applied to Italy, but this is kind of a pain because I have to cover both areas, and it's very easy for the attacker to shift which box he's in. As far as I know, maybe they can't move those. Maybe those can only. I think those can only be moved by SR. In which case, there's sort of a telegraphing, and there's not really much help to shifting them, if that's the case. And in fact, if that's the case, then the Germans can SR their planes over. I think that's probably how it works, so there wouldn't have been much option there. But anyway, getting back to the rockets, yeah, I'm going to be able to attack Plaste. But the rocket rules are some of the more annoying, along with all of the special cases, and if the game wasn't filled with special cases, well, a few of such things would be okay. But in the case of the rockets, well, you don't have to pay for them. They're treated like air bases. Something I didn't realize, which is why I hadn't put them on the board, was I thought I had to buy them. But there was, while I was looking through for rockets, there's a rule for rocket factories with a rule number that doesn't go anywhere, and I've got no idea what rocket factories are. I can't find any hint to them anywhere else. I'm just going to ignore it because it's an index rule that doesn't exist. But, you know, this is the kind of thing where, geez, you know, you can't expect the index to be perfect. I know that. But when a game is designed the way this one is, the index becomes an invaluable resource in the sense that you run into things like rocket factories that you have no idea. You know, you probably read about it at some point, but it's such a thick set of rules of special cases that you have no idea how to process it or what it might mean unless you can find it. And I could find nothing about it. I think I got no idea what it means. You know, what it may mean is that you have to have objectives assigned to building rockets, but I don't know. And maybe there's an attack cost to rocket fire or something. Again, I don't know. That wasn't implied anywhere in the section that I found on rockets. Most of the rockets rules is here under the strategic bombing, and then I also looked in the technology section. I think when the technology was used in the older system, I think the tech book actually included the information on these new technologies, which I can understand the desire to compile everything into one rule book, but actually seems to make it more difficult. Perhaps because that rule book is hard to handle, just physically. Anyway, and also it's impossible to find things in it, whereas something like this is more easily digestible. I know where to find the rockets in there. I've got no idea in this thing. It's too big, you know. So the Allies continue to cycle their forces upward, and I guess we're ready to push into the winter of 44. I do have to remember, and I may do this before starting the next turn, both the Russians and the US are going to get a mobilization. This is the last mobilizations in the game as far as I know. And so it's kind of the last time I get free troops, but they take a while to show up, so I don't know how big a deal it is. Anyway, we'll plug those in, and I'll send this up first.